everybody in attendance tonight, get a bottle in your hands and pull up. And if you are KME hated them.
Hello, and welcome to Inconsequential Souls. So, today I want to discuss the new Dark Souls 3 DLC soon to come, currently titled Ashes of Ariandel, I think. I don't know how to pronounce that. But yeah, we have quite a bit to talk about, and because that's the case, this video might be broken up into two parts, so I can basically cover everything, because there was a lot going on in that reveal, and I need to kind of compare it to what it is I was discussing in the previous video about the big announcement coming up. But true to form, it's pretty much what I expected. I honestly didn't expect a trailer per se. I did expect some kind of reveal. I was thinking maybe mostly gameplay. But they chose to go with a trailer, and that's pretty true to form with Dark Souls, as far as Dark Souls games are concerned. So I wasn't too surprised about that. However, what I need to go do is some investigation on what's changed with the new updates that came out on the 25th. So yeah, once I go see what changes have happened there, then I'll be able to add that to part 2. But let's do the part 1 of this video, because there's quite a bit to go over. Now, I know how the Dark Souls community pretty much works. Everybody's gonna cover basically, oh, this trailer looks so cool, I'm so excited, la 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 la. You've heard that already. I'm not going to discuss that, because there was something in the trailer that interests me more than anything else. I'll get to that stuff later, maybe, but I don't really think it's necessary, because somebody else more than likely said it. Like, there's too many people who do this, and like, people probably took the video, rewind it back and forward. I'm not doing all of that, okay? I just want to focus on one thing, and that is ice magic, or what we would call cryomancy. I'm not sure if they're going to call that in Dark Souls 3, but who knows? We don't know, and it's going to be a cool thing to kind of look into. Okay, so why is this whole ice magic thing so important? All right. So this is the most important part, alright? The important thing about cryomancy, or ice magic, because we don't have an official name for it just yet, and that might be a thing in Dark Souls 3. That's going to be very important, because we were first introduced to the concept of ice magic in Dark Souls 2, when we were introduced to the Ivory King, and his princess, or his queen, Alsana. Now, I might be pronouncing her name right. I'll get it right the second time, but for now, I'm just going to call her Alsana. That's what I remember her as. And that's when we're introduced into the idea of ice magic. Now, this is pretty important, because Ilium Lois, as far as Dark Souls 2's lore, or the Dark Souls universe period is concerned, that is the only introduction we get to the concept of ice magic, and the first time we get introduced to the concept, and know to some extent that it's tied into I wanted to say spell casting, but they're all spell casting, but I mean the magic art, that's not faith. What is it called? Sorcery. Okay, I don't know why I have such a hard time, but ice magic is strongly tied into sorcery, and so we know to some extent that it has a close relationship to sorcery, and it seems true to form in the new DLC. So we're gonna get to find out exactly what relationship ice magic, or cryomancy, has with sorcery. Now, this is the only thing that kind of throws, I would say, a wrench into my whole gear grinding process, is the fact that I didn't take the time out to really study the the ice weapons in Dark Souls 3. So I'm not sure how they relate to sorcery, or even if they do at all. And there's plenty of weapons that have the whole concept of the frostbite debuff that you can apply to enemies in Dark Souls 3. But I haven't got a chance to mess around with it, so I don't know if they scale with sorcery or not, or if it's its own thing. What I do know, though, is that frostbite kind of was lackluster because of how straightforward it was. Like, this is just from what I know, and this is doing like a lot of hours of PvP. Pretty much to get frostbite on someone, you had to be close range, or it was only limited to melee. And for the most part, in Dark Souls 3, if somebody doesn't want to be hit, like, they can't be hit. Like, if they want to tumble all over the stage, they can pretty much do that. Whereas something like bleed or, I can't really say poison, but they have alternatives. You can kind of control when and how you poison someone, because the poison has a bunch of different ranges. Bleed doesn't, but the ability to build it up so very quickly kind of compensates for the fact that bleed doesn't have a whole bunch of versatility as far as the ranges are concerned. Frostbite kind of fell behind the curve on everything else, so this new idea of being able to use ice magic or cryomancy is pretty interesting, because it can breathe some life into the whole idea of frostbite, which I never thought was a particularly bad debuff. I know a lot of people would disagree with that. My whole thing was just like the application of it. It's just like, okay, so I got frostbite on you, so how do I capitalize? And I think the weakness, which is probably going to be what's addressed in this new Ashes of Ariandel DLC, is how do you apply it? Because if you think about it, frostbite, unless you were doing PvE, frostbite was pretty much limited to melee range. So I can't really see. Well, I would say we never really got to see how frostbite would apply long range. So, for example, if you had some kind of frost breath like Vort of the Boreal Valley, or one of the Outrider Knights that you fight, like, imagine being able to frostbite somebody from a distance with like the kind of spells that they have, and then close the distance in with like dash attacks or something like that. Like, we never get to see those strategies because they're limited to what it is that the enemies do. But that wasn't really an option for the player, and it seems as though this whole concept of cryomancy or ice magic in Dark Souls 3 might change that. So who knows? That's one of the things that I'm looking forward to. So out of everything that we've seen, what I want to focus on today is the idea of cryomancy. Now, there's more important reasons behind that, except for just looking at the idea of giving that frostbite debuff a little bit, breathing life into that. It's also going to be important from a lore aspect to me. Mostly because if you think about it, as many of the really, I would say, obscure spells that you obtain, or the really rare lost relics of Dark Souls that allow you to cast pyromancy in a very special way, they don't really compare to the ice magic, because when you think about it, even with Dark Souls 2, there was no clear description or any kind of official address to why it is that this type of, well, I can't really call it magic in Dark Souls 3 just yet, but this really strange type of force exists in contrast to everything else, but it's never explained where it came from, what was the origin of it, or what group uses it. It just kind of falls in your lap. And that's very true for even Dark Souls 2. And I might have said 3, but I mean it's almost the same. Like in Dark Souls 2, you kind of fight enemies and they drop things, and you get some lore behind. For example, Eliam Lois and some of the major players, but it doesn't really focus on, well, what is this ice magic stuff? Whereas that's not necessarily the case with other things such as sorcery and pyromancy. It's sort of like a thing like, here's your ice magic, go do things with it. But you never get to find out where it came from, what's the purpose of it, or anything. And it's pretty much the same thing in Dark Souls 3. You slay these Outrider Knights and they just give you stuff. You don't get to understand, like, well, what is all of this ice stuff? Like, even when you think about the Fire Witches in Eliam Lois. I'm sorry, I keep calling him Lois. But in the Boreal Valley, it's described how it is that they obtain their fire abilities. But when you think about the inherent abilities that they have there, which is all of this ice magic and, or I would say cryomancy, and the ability to inflict debuffs known as frostbite, like, it's never explained, like, where this came from. There's like urns of this stuff just sitting around, and nobody even they pretend it's not even there. So that's probably one of the most obscure, I can't even really call it spells, but I would say abilities. I don't even know at this point. Until we get more information, I can't even really say what it is. Even from the trailers, where it looks as though some sort of mage is casting an ice spell. I don't know for certain. I can't tell exactly what's going on there. So that's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to the DLC, because I'm going to be the guy who's going to start talking about these things, because it was something that I was curious about in Dark Souls 2. And it seems as though as well that it's not said specifically, and it's no person who gets direct credit for it. But I know of a character named Carmina who is heavily, I would say heavily part of the lore behind pyromancy and the humans, and how she took it in a different direction. And she's responsible for some of the more unique spells that you can obtain. And it seems as though when it comes to Eliam Lois, and probably even the Boreal Valley, those places seem to be the place where sorcery kind of gets flipped on its head and new things are birthed from it, if that makes any sense. Now, I'll leave that alone for now. We'll come back to that. But I just wanted to throw that out there, that ice magic is really obscure, and I'm thinking when we finally get to read, and that's the thing, if we even get any type of clues, because it's a possibility you might get this ice spell and the lore has something to do with the DLC giving you information about characters, and cryomancy or ice magic completely stays hidden. Either way, I'm definitely going to address it, and I'm going to give my final thoughts on it, because at this point, considering that this is the last Dark Souls game, if we don't get information here, it's unlikely that we're going to get any type of solid foundation about ice magic from anywhere else. So I'm going to go ahead and just start discussing it at length once we get more information about that, even if nothing significant is revealed from that spell that we get to see in the DLC. Okay, so from this, what I can see, and this is just briefly covering the other things that I saw in the trailer, it looks like we're going to get more PvP variety, which is always good. I'm not going to mention what it is. Like, I'm sure you saw the trailer, you've seen the other spells. Like, you know what I'm talking about. And then, of course, Frostbite seems like it's going to have life breathed into it. Now, that's cool because I really did want to make an ice-themed character, not necessarily an ice mage. I've already done that in other games. And that's kind of why I'm excited to kind of delve into the idea of a Cryomancer in a Dark Souls series. Because, you know, I've messed around with ice mages, quote unquote, before. So doing it in Dark Souls and seeing how it is that it compares to how I did it in other games would be really interesting. Okay, short history lesson on ice magic as far as Ilium Lois is concerned. And this has to be addressed because I don't want there to be some misconception, because I know somebody out there is gonna kind of start throwing these ideas of lore around. I'm not talking about anybody specific, but I want to make it very clear. We don't get introduced, and I'm betting money on this. Like, we don't get introduced to the concept of ice magic until Dark Souls 2 through all of the Souls-related games. I'm even talking about Bloodborne. Like, the idea of cryomancy is very specific to Dark Souls and Ilium Lois. I'm sure some of the other games probably dabbled in it, but it seems as though Dark Souls 3 is going to be the only, I would say, version, or I would say installment in the series completely that's going to dabble in the idea of, like, you can go into the game and be a straight up cryomancer. That's a very real possibility. So you have to acknowledge where it comes from. And that specifically is Ilium Lois. And the very specific reason why that is because no matter what anybody tells you, this is the actual truth. The development of the ice magic or cryomancy, I'm not sure specifically what it is. I'll just call it the frozen Ilium Lois abilities were specifically, I would say, not necessarily made, because I can't prove that there wasn't some other source that they originated from, but they were specifically used to keep the old chaos in check. And that's why it was significant in Ilium Lois. Now, that being the case, there's no reason for frozen Ilium Lois or its abilities to exist in any other place. It was specifically created to keep the chaos in check. So that means, for a fact, that Pontiff Sullivan, all of the Outrider Knights, the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, any of the other people from Ariandel Valley in that frozen area have some relation or tie into Ilium Lois. And to solidify that, one of the most important rings from Dark Souls 2 is the Ivory King ring, which I think is called the Night Slayer's ring, makes an appearance, tying it all together. Now, I know they gave it to a very specific character who seems as though he has nothing to do with Ariandel Valley. But I will say that because that character does appear in Lost Izalith under certain special circumstances, and you still get the item from that character, and that really ties it in if you completely skip the character previously when you can have an encounter with them, that ring has something to do with where the chaos was birthed. And it's very specific that Ilium Lois and the chaos are closely tied together. So that means that in some way or another, Ariandel Valley, and even going beyond Carthus, Ariandel Valley and Lost Izalith are tied together in some way or another. Whether that gets addressed in the DLC or not, I have no idea. But I am definitely going to address that once I get more information. But regardless of what anyone else tells you, the idea of cryomancy or ice magic came from and was applied by Eliam Loyce for a very specific reason. So the Outrider Knights and anybody else in Erythio Valley who has anything to do with like trying to apply the frostbite debuff on you and all of that, they have a close tie to Eliam Loyce in some way or another. Fact. That's not my opinion. That is an absolute fact. And the Ivory King's ring ties that all together. Okay. So now I want to get into why it is that I'm excited about this cryomancy or ice magic. And I'll just do it briefly. Like, I'm not going to take up a very long time talking about it because I kind of mentioned it earlier. But number one, I've always made the claim whenever I critique Dark Souls games that it's not really a big deal to me in a grand scheme of things because to some degree I've played better games. Now, when I say that, I want to be very specific. There is a game, okay, and you can find it on my channel. It's called Terraria, right? Now, Terraria is very similar to Dark Souls in a lot of ways. So when I say things like, you know, I like the PvP in Dark Souls and in Dark Souls 3, and I was complaining about it not being up to par previously before the 1.09 regulation updates. Terraria is one of the games I was talking about, whereas there's PvP in Terraria, and what's cool about it is that you can set a bunch of fundamental rules. You can decide which weapons are banned, which armors are banned, how the arenas are built, the size of the arena, how many players are in the arena, whether it's 2-on-1, 3-on-1. You get to basically decide all of the rules and regulations for PvP in that game in real time. I mean, all you have to do is create a server and create rules. And if a person doesn't like it, they can go somewhere else. So I really mean it when I say that compared to other games that I've played, Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3's PvP prior to, you know, the updates that I discussed in other videos needed a lot of help because I've been playing better games with better PvP. Now, I know that might be hard to believe, but when I say specifically that I went into what you would call the arena in one of my favorite, I would say, servers that used to exist back before Terraria got a 1.3, I think it was a 1.30 update. I used to go to this server and do PvP all the time, and I used to basically like dominate the arena. You know, most of the time, like there were better players than me, but I would usually dominate the arena pretty heavily with a storm mage that I had, who used a lot of ice spells. So what I say is like, there's a lot of strong themes that you can create in some of the better games that I've played. And you know, I'll show some examples, whilst I'm discussing this, but yeah, I'm not just bluffing. Like when I say that I've played better games, like I'm not joking. Now that's not to say that I'm making a direct comparison between Terraria and Dark Souls 3. What I'm saying is that when it comes to making builds, quote unquote, or building strong themes and concepts, like I'm tough on Dark Souls 3 because, you know, I have other things to compare it to. Like Dark Souls isn't the end all be all game for me, like it might be for other people in the community, you know, and that's nothing against them. It's just like, it's like I've been saying, like I played a lot of good games. So when I praise Dark Souls for the things that it's done right, or when I critique it for the things that I don't think that it did all of that well, I'm not coming from a place of bitterness or trying to make some kind of point. I'm serious. Like I've played other games that are a little bit better. So that's my whole point about that. So I'm excited to see where these themes can go, because I mean, as you know, I've played an assassin through and through. through Dark Souls 3 from the beginning to the end, and I'm also doing PvP with the very same assassin. And I got to see all the assassin's strengths, all the assassin's weaknesses, and I'm okay with that because I feel as though the strengths far outweigh the weaknesses, and that's okay. You know, it's a highly competitive class, and it's amazing because it's just a few tweaks to a fundamental class that was in the game already. But if you've seen some of my other videos, you'll notice that I critiqued Dark Souls pretty heavily for having a thief class in Dark Souls 1, but Dark Souls 1 being the direct enemy to thief builds, which I thought was interesting. It's like you have thief as a starting class, and the only thing good about them is that they have a master key, but that's not even good because you can pick that as a starting gift. You know, I go into why it is that I was completely like just thrown off by that in other videos, so I'm not going to address that here. I'm just saying, like, I'm excited to see what we're going to be able to do with some of the newer stuff. And I bring that up again also because prior to this reveal, you may already know, if you've seen my Dark Souls 3 review, that I feel as though Dark Souls 3, you know, was a pretty complete game that just needed a few tweaks here and there. And it's seeming as though this DLC might be those tweaks. I never really considered those tweaks being adding to, but that's a very real possibility. You know, like adding to rather than fixing what you already have. I mean, that might work. I mean, I've seen it work, whereas Dark Souls 2 is the case, where they added more spells. Like I mentioned before, I forgot exactly what video it was, but I brought up the concept of Fire Snake being added by the Old Iron King DLC, breathe life back into the Firestorm spells. So that could pretty much happen in Dark Souls 3 as well. Like, I can't foresee the future. You know, I can guess it, but I can't foresee exactly what it is that they're trying to do. But from what I can tell, specifically, anyone who becomes proficient with that not pyromancy, but the cryomancy or ice magic spell that I saw, which I'm pretty certain inflicts the frostbite debuff. Like, it would be completely stupid if it doesn't. But if what I'm seeing is correct and that inflicts the frostbite debuff, that may very well breathe life into the Outrider Knight weapons. I mean, I don't see a reason why not. And then with some tweaks and things like that, it can easily be made that the debuff to frostbite is a little better. I don't personally think it needs to be buffed. I just think that it needed the ability to actually work. You know, like when you have I would say a debuff that maybe isn't all of that dramatic, such as like bleed, which does a very obvious amount of damage, or something like I can't even really say poison because most people have the impression that poison is rather lackluster. I can't say for certain because I haven't used it, but I can see their concern. But what I would say is, like, the entire time I've been playing Dark Souls 3, I've probably been hit with the frostbite debuff maybe once or twice, and it was scary, but I didn't die because I had frostbite on me. So that, I mean, that's not to say that it's a bad debuff or anything. It's just that I haven't really had the need to respect it as a credible source of a debuff to be concerned with. So I don't know. It's a very real possibility that the new DLC might breathe life into that concept. But anyhow, I'll discuss more about this in the second part of this video. So I'm going to analyze that trailer, and I have quite a long list of stuff to talk about, but I just wanted to address some of the things that I've seen really quickly, and then I'm going to move on to the more elaborate things. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.